Hi, everyone. Good day. I hope everyone is doing well. It's nice to come to you with another video, which is meant to help you to understand fuzzy synthetic evaluation model, which other papers also term it as fuzzy synthetic modeling. Others call it fuzzy synthetic technique. Others call it fuzzy synthetic approach. All of them are acceptable. So in this last and probably the which also happens to be the third video, I will use Akomea-Frimpong paper, which was published in 2015, and the title of the paper is Evaluation and Ranking of Risk Factors in Public-Private Partnership Water Supply Projects in Developing Countries using Fuzzy Synthetic Evaluation Approach. And this paper was published in Expert Systems with Applications. And this paper has received more than 200 citations, which I think is a very good paper that we can use as a reference point to help us to understand the fuzzy synthetic evaluation. So I'm going to do the leading, the tutorial. And my name is Akomea-Frimpong, a PhD candidate. And I'm hopeful that so far all that we have done in the other videos using the other two papers, you have really enjoyed them. So stay around and then enjoy these tutorials as well. So before we go into this last video on fuzzy synthetic evaluation, I will encourage you to read other articles on fuzzy synthetic evaluation. There are a number of them online. So find them out and then read them, because the more you read, the more you understand. I personally, I will not encourage you to just stick to the 3 papers I've used so far in my tutorials, but rather I will encourage you to read about 2 more, 3 more, 4 more, 5 more, or even, as many as you can. Just read more. And as you read more, you understand what fuzzy synthetic evaluation is. So far, I've explained the fuzzy synthetic evaluation to you. Therefore, I will not go back again and explain what fuzzy synthetic is. This was done in the first video. So I'll go straight to this paper, what was done in this paper, so that we don't waste too much time on the items in this paper. So I will explain each item in this paper to you, focusing more on the fuzzy synthetic evaluation aspects. Okay, so going straight, if you read this paper, the paper is generous enough to give you the explanation or the reason behind fuzzy synthetic evaluation. So in section 2.2, the paper has explained that, so you can read about it. Now let's go into the method. So with the method, the first thing that the study did was to identify the risk factors. And I mentioned that we have been doing this, and we have done this through our literature review. We have done our literature review. We have been doing literature review, and we'll continue to write literature review papers. It's not like we are ending or we have ended. We'll continue to write literature review papers. Yes, so the literature review papers that we have written so far, if you remember, we identify some factors. Okay, all the factors are not related to risk, or they were all not related to risk, but they are just good examples for you to understand how this is done. So before this is done properly, before fuzzy synthetic evaluation is done properly, conduct a thorough literature review to identify the various factors. I will call them variables, as I mentioned in my other video. I prefer using variables. Variables tend to be better instead of saying factors. But if you also use factors, you are not wrong. Okay, then from the literature review results, you put the results into a questionnaire survey, or if it's the interview guide, whatever you want to put it. But normally questionnaire survey is recommended because of the nature of the factors that you have. Okay, and then within the factors, you need to tell us the Likert scale. In this study, for example, the Likert scale that was used was a 7-point Likert scale. Grading is from 1 extremely low to 7 extremely high. So this is how, or this was how it was rated in this study. And this study used a Delphi approach. Yeah, this use a Delphi approach. So what is the Delphi approach? So Delphi approach recently has been used, or is being used by many researchers in the construction industry. It's not new. It's not something that is entirely new. It has been around for some time, but I have seen a lot of researchers using that. So if you want to read more about Delphi, kindly read more about that. Okay. Then from the Delphi approach straight into the data analysis. In other words, like once the data has been collected, the next step was to analyze the data or the data. So in this study, they use SPSS as I've taught you. But there are some things that they did, and I've already taken you through them, but I will repeat them again. So in the data analysis stage, this is what was done. SPSS was used, that's the software, but the statistical tests which were performed include reliability analysis. And this is where I mentioned that you have to establish what we call the internal consistency of the data using the Cronbach alpha. So I've shown you this, how to do reliability analysis using Cronbach alpha with the SPSS. I've taught you how to go about that. Mean analysis, this is where we use a mean score. I've also taught you that. Something I have mentioned it in the previous video, but I have not shown you how it is done, which I will show you some briefly today, is how to use normalization. So I mentioned in my previous video that you can decide to do just the mean scoring or mean analysis and move on, or you can also do normalization. And why do you do all these things? You do this to determine the criticality of the variables or the factors, which of the factors that you consider to be critical, especially when you are dealing with a large number of variables or factors. So we use the mean analysis and normalization, or just the normalization, or you can also use the mean score to establish the variables that are very critical so that you can move on with a fewer number of variables, which I would not say easy to deal with, but which are considered to be critical, statistically critical. Then from there, you start working on the fuzzy synthetic evaluation. There's something missing here. You can see that this study, they didn't do factor analysis. So this study is a little bit different from the other two papers I've shown to you. In the other two papers, factor analysis was done. Why was factor analysis done? So this is where I have to explain to you. Why is it that here they didn't do factor analysis? Because in the two previous videos I've shown to you, or in the two previous tutorials, I mentioned that factor analysis was conducted. But here, since factor analysis is missing, the reason why here it is missing is that factor analysis is only used just to categorize, just to group the factors. Okay, especially when you get to know that the factors don't have much prior theoretical standing or support. Like in the past, people have not done much studies on the topic that you are dealing with, and they have not categorized that. But I think the reason why, which we'll see them very soon, not I think, which we'll see them very soon, is that already this area, this PPP water project area, the authors established that people have already done studies on that. So they just categorize the variables, the number of variables that are being used in this study using previous studies. So more, it's in other words, this was done in a more, not exactly, but it was done in a more sense of a confirmatory factor analysis, where the factor groupings have already been established. They have already been established in literature. So that was a kind of sense that it was not done in the sense of exploratory factor analysis, where you need to use SPSS to run it. Yeah, so that's why the factor groupings are missing. Another thing too also is that it's not always the case that you have to use the factor analysis to categorize the variables. Some variables already studies, prior literature, reports, project reports, institutional documents have already established some factors to be part of something. Like if you are talking about interest rate, if interest rates are going high, all things being equal, if you are undertaking any study and you are grouping them, you definitely put interest rate under financial crisis. There is no way you can go and put interest rate, the rising of interest rate in an economy. You cannot go and add it to, let's say, social progress. It doesn't mean that you can add, you can, but interest rate fit more under financial crisis than social progress. Yeah. So some things have already been established in literature, and there are plenty studies available on it to use them to categorize them. So that's why it was not done. But rather they use prior studies to do that. We'll see it very soon. Okay, so let's go into it. So one, reliability test was done. And when reliability test was done, 40 factors. So the factors consisted of 40 factors. And reliability test was done. When it was done, because this study dealt with risk factors, there are two sections of risk that must always be looked at. That's the probability of occurrence, which we also call the risk of probability, and then the consequences of occurrence. In other words, the severity of occurrence. Okay, so let me show you this. This is well known in literature. So risk always has, every risk has two sections, which we also call a risk matrix. So the likelihood of occurrence and the impact, we can also call it the same, but other studies also have a way of mentioning them. Others also call them the risk formula. So the risk formula has two sections. That's the probability. So the formula for calculating risk is probability and severity. In other words, risk has two sections, probability and severity. Others call the severity the consequences of occurrence. And then others call the probability as the chance of the event, of the chance of that event happening. Any of them is acceptable. Okay, so let me keep going. Let me keep on going so that we don't waste too much time. So when the data was grouped into two, that is the probability and severity, the data on the probability of occurrence, which is a risk probability, gave a Kronbach alpha of 0.886. And then the risk of severity, which is also known as the consequences of the occurrence, also gave 0.935. That means the two of them satisfy our threshold, the threshold, which I also explained to you in the other video, that for a Kronbach alpha to be acceptable, for your internal consistency to be solid, to be reliable, to be okay, you must attain 0.7 and above. 0.7 and above. So the two of them satisfy that. That means the study has a high internal reliability and consistency, and therefore we can keep using the data for our analysis. After that, the researchers or the authors conducted what we call the mean score analysis. With this mean score analysis, the severity and the probability of occurrence were also done. Okay, so when this was done, the results is shown in the table 4. Okay, so with risk probability, the data on the risk probability, which is the probability of occurrence of the risk, these are the means using the factors. And when you look at it from the severity of occurrence, because the two sides, these are the means. But to get one score, one risk score for each of the factors, you need to get what we call risk impact. In fact, the words risk impact, other studies call it risk score. So in case you come across risk score, it's also acceptable. We just want to get one risk score for the probability of occurrence and risk of severity. So how do you get that? Very simple. You multiply the means, 5.58. This 5.58. You multiply it by 5.18 on the same factor, and you have to do it for all the factors. So this column times this column, and it will give you what we call risk significance index. You can decide to ignore this, but you can also decide to bring it. It's not that important. It's not so important. You can decide to bring it. You can decide to ignore it. Okay, so this times this will give you this. So 5.58 by 5.18. So let's do it and see whether it is correct. 5.18 by 5.58. Okay, so we are getting 28.90. So let's go and check whether that's exactly what was. Again, yes. So 28.9 something, which is, so when you multiply 1 by that, and you have to do it for all the other factors, and that will give you a risk significance index. Once again, as I said, some studies don't show risk significance index, but you can decide to show it. If you show it, that's fine. If you don't, that's okay. Any of them is acceptable. Then how do we get a risk impact, which I term it as risk score? Other studies term it as risk score. How do you do that? So to get a risk impact or risk score, you have to find the square root of the risk significance index, the square root. So that is how come here he gave this formula. So this formula, demonstrate it properly or demonstrate what I'm trying to say. So to get a risk impact or the risk score is the probability times the severity, and then the score that you get, which is the risk significance index. Then you find the square root of that. So square root of this will give us this. So let's see. Let's click on square root. Oh no. Okay, we'll go back. Square root of 28.9. So that will give us 5.37. It's 5.38. Is that what it was? Yes. So 5 to 2 decimal places. So 5.38. Convert this one into 1, add it to make it 8. Okay. So yeah. So you have it, that you see it. Okay. Okay. And another thing too is that I guess, and here I will use the word guess in the sense that I believe these factors were not in order, because normally when you use either SPSS or you do it manually, you see that these factors, you see them not to be in order. But what the authors, Ameya and Chan, what they did was that they rearranged the whole table by bringing the risk score, the risk factor, which is highest, to the first place, and the one with the lowest to the last place. Yeah, so I believe they were not in order. They were mixed up, but they just sorted them out. So that's it. I've also seen studies where authors just leave them, and then instead of this one being one, maybe this one was somewhere. It was somewhere here, maybe on the number 17th. Then the authors would just write one. But I think they just wanted to present it in a nice way. So they rearranged the table to make it nice. Now let's come to the normalized values. Then the question is, how did they get the normalized values? So still we are trying to get the critical one, the critical values. Okay, so you can decide to use the risk impact. So with this, you can say that, okay, my threshold is that any factor which scores a risk impact of less than 4 will not be accepted, to be taken out. It's only the ones that score more than 4 are the ones that we are going to take, or that are going to be retained as critical factors. But here they went ahead to conduct a normalization analysis. And how was this normalization done? So this is the formula for normalization. I want to show you the formula. So this is the formula. So to get a normalized score, you take the mean. The mean means the current mean, which in this context, the factor. I mean, the impact, the risk score. You take the factor and its risk score, or risk impact, which in this context, if you take foreign exchange rate, is 5.38. You take that. So that here will represent the mean, because this 5.38 and all the scores in this column represent a single value for both sides. And when I say both sides, when you combine the risk probability and risk severity. Okay, one score for that. Good. So 5.38 minus what? So the formula, let's take the formula again. Minus the mean, minus the minimum mean. So how do you get the minimum mean? So you look at all the means here. Which one is the minimum? Is this one, 3.46. Okay, so let's do this exercise. So 5.38 minus the minimum mean, the minimum risk impact is 3.46. 3.46. Great. So then what again? Divided by maximum mean minus minimum mean. Okay, so let's do it. So what is the maximum mean? Definitely is the first one. Okay, because that was ranked as first, number one, which is 5.38. That's the maximum mean. Okay. I just want us to do it for about 2 factors, then you understand it. So 5.38 minus the minimum mean, which is 3.46. Then you divide, so this becomes the numerator. And this becomes the denominator. So you divide the 2 sides, numerator divided by the denominator, and that will give you 1. So that's how come the normalized value for the foreign exchange rate factor is 1. Now let's do it for the second one. At least I just want us to do it for one more, so that I just want you to understand it. You can use this for your own studies and your own analysis. So let's take the second one. With the second one, the mean, which is the risk impact or the risk score, is 5.35. So it's 5.35 minus the minimum mean is 3.46. Don't forget. Then the maximum and the minimum, it will be the same as this, because the maximum is 5.38 minus 3.46. It will be what, the 1.992. Yes, so the numerator will stay the same. Then you divide the numerator by the denominator, and that will give you 0.98. 0.98. So let's check whether they had 0.98. Exactly, they have the same. For the corruption, let's take water theft. Now let's take water theft. Okay, so water theft, the mean is 5.16. 5.16. 5.16 minus the minimum mean among all the means of all the factors that we are looking at. The minimum is 3.46. This happens to be the last one on the bottom. So when you minus that 1.7, and then this one will stay the same, because the maximum is 5.38, which happens to be the one that was ranked first. And then the minimum is the one, once again, the one which was ranked last, 3.46. So this one will also remain the same. So when you divide this by this, to give you 0.885. If you convert it into 2 decimal places, it's going to be 0.89. Are we having the same 0.89? So that was how it was done. Okay, so very simple. Okay, this is a little bit different from the other ones that we have seen, but it doesn't mean that what other people did, they are wrong. No, this is also another way of going about it, just to determine the critical factors. Yes, as was done by Wuni and Roberts. Ibrahim. Okay, so we have established this. So this table is understood. Now let's move on. I've explained it now, we understand. Now let's come to the categorization. So this is where, under no circumstance, the factor analysis will come in. This is where exploratory factor analysis should come in, where we'll run the exploratory factor analysis. Then we'll use principal component analysis as an extraction method to extract the principal groupings, the principal components, the principal categories of the factors. But look at the factors, what was done. They didn't do it that way. It was not done that way. How was it categorized? Now let's look at it. How was it categorized? I just want to check. They said, when you start from here, a careful analysis of table 2 and comparisons with related literature. The literature, they have cited the literature, offer 3 insights. Following series of sector reforms embarked upon by government of developing countries over the decade. Okay, some risks still remain insignificant. These include top 5 with impact values of above 5, and other risk factors. Okay, this and that and that and that. Okay, some risk variables have declined in importance, such as traditional, political, and all that. Then C, new risk factors such as poor contract design are also emerging. So this is how they, according to them, when they read the literature, okay, when they read the literature, but in addition, I think they also offered additional thing. Don't let me based on this to judge. But what I'm trying to say is that from here, we can even see that the analysis which is going to be presented in table 3 from table 2 is being done based on previous literature and reforms. which have been done in the construction industry relating to water projects, especially projects undertaken using the PPP model. Okay, so let me continue reading. So risk factors. So to conclude in table 2, before we come to table 3, this table 3, to conclude this table 2, they said risk factors with normalized impact values greater than or equal to 0.5 are deemed critical. So this is how they determine their criticality. Any risk factor which didn't score or didn't get a normalized value of 0.5 and above, that risk factor is considered to be not critical, considered not to be significant, considered not to be important. Okay, so let's look at it. So that means if I'm looking at table 2, all these risk factors, the ones that come after insufficient operator performance, they were deemed as insignificant. So factors such as regulatory risk, technology risk, unfavorable local, global economy, low quality water assets, residual value risk, procurement, and so forth and so forth. They were all considered to be not significant because they didn't meet the threshold of a normalized value of 0.5 and above. I hope it is understood. Okay, now let's come to how the table 3 was categorized. Once again, as I mentioned, normally this is done, this categorization is done with an exploratory factor analysis, where we apply the principal component analysis as an extraction technique to get the categories. But let's look at how they did it. Since the second objective is to assess the level of risk of the 22, so after the criticality was done, I think the remaining ones were 22. Yes, 22. So you can see. So from here, the remaining ones were 22. Okay, so get it. So after this, all the other ones that came after them were taken out, were cut out as not important. They were seen as risk factors which are not critical. But the ones which are with the 22 and going down to number 1, they were considered to be critical. So how was how were they categorized? So let's look at them. Since the second objectives are were categorized under the 3 main categories. Okay, so how was it done? Among various classifications reported in the literature, the grouping suggested by Sama and is adopted with little modification for this study. Because it's systematically classified the factors in accordance with the characteristics of different aspects of typical risk involved in a PPP project. The 22 factors were grouped according to their relation to each factors under financial and economic category. 8 factors under legal and socio-political category. 6 factors under technical category. Other statistical methods such as factor analysis can be used. So here you see, you can see that they have or they are categorizing the factors based on literature, and they have cited Sama and Ozogan and Abigun as the papers that they use to group the factors. But in addition to this, they are acknowledging the fact that apart from this approach, which is just using the literature to categorize the factors, they are also saying that you can also use factor analysis. So I really like what they have done, so that anybody who is reading this paper will not be deceived or will not be confused and say that, but like Isaac taught us that when you are trying to categorize the factors, it's always the factor analysis that is the best. It's not always. Yeah, there are situations where you can do this, what they have done. And as I mentioned, this is is relevant when you are trying to go ahead and conduct what we call the confirmatory factor analysis. But in situations where you are trying to conduct exploratory factor analysis, then it's good you go by if you are conducting exploratory factor analysis, then you use the SPSS software. Okay, so yeah, so this has been established. So that's how the factors were categorized. So let me show you an example. If I give you this paper of mine, I've done a similar thing. So if I am writing this, I can also just cite myself and say that I did a study and I categorized the financial risk factors into this. And I'll take it from here and keep on going. Because in this study, for example, I have the groupings. I did the groupings. I want to show you. So this is how I grouped the 54 financial risk. I grouped them into pre-construction risk, construction risk, operation and maintenance risk, disposal and decommissioning risk. Okay, so this is what they are talking about. Or maybe you can just decide to categorize the risk into specific financial risk and systematic financial risk. You know them is acceptable. So that was done. Or that's how they group the risk factors. Okay, so this they didn't conduct exploratory factor analysis by running the normal SPSS thing that we did. Okay, so any of them, either you use the literature, prior literature, what people have done already as the basis because to categorize the factors, or you can also conduct exploratory factor analysis. Any of them is acceptable. Good. So that has been established. So we know the categories, and the categories, they have presented them here. So this is how they were presented. Okay. Okay. So these are the risk impact, which I call them a risk score. And then overall ranking. As the overall ranking, this overall ranking is from table 2. This overall ranking then is from table 2, how they were ranked in table 2. And then how they are being ranked here. So 8, 8, 6, together 22 factors, which we established that they are critical from the normalization analysis. Okay, now let's come to the fuzzy. So now we are moving into using the fuzzy. So now let's go into the fuzzy. So once these things have been done, then the grounds are fertile for us to do our fuzzy synthetic analysis. Okay, so what do you do? So if you remember, in our previous video, I took you through some steps. Here too, we'll go through some steps, but with some few modifications. So the first thing that was done was that set up evaluation index system. Okay, so this is just more of like a matrix. So given the 3 risk classifications and evaluation, 3 risk classification means from table 3, the groups, the 3 groups. Okay, and evaluation index systems can be set by defining the principal risk factors. The PRFCA means the principal risk factors as the first level index system. Okay. Yeah. The critical risk factors. The critical risk factors are the individual risk factors. Okay. Okay, so get a difference. Yeah, the critical risk factors are the individual, and then it just here too the coding and the names. You can also use your own names and coding. This is not, you don't have one way of you saying that okay, they are even written here. The critical risk factors. The critical risk factors are the individual factors, and we are terming them, or we are calling them critical risk factors because after the normalization analysis, we established 22 factors, which we term them as critical factors. Okay. Okay. And then the PRF is the principal risk factors, which represents the groups, the principal groups. Okay, so you first set up the evaluation in index system. The groups are called first level index systems, and then the critical or the individual factors are called the second level index system. Okay, these index systems are used as input variables for the FSE analysis. So if you remember, with respect to the other one that we did, I mentioned that you need to set up your critical variables as a first step in the FSE analysis. So it is worth noting that the index systems hold for both risk probability and risk severity. So in this context, what we are going to do is that because we have two sections to each of the risk factors, we need to set up two of them for each of the factors, because each of the factors has probability of occurrence and severity of the consequences. Okay, so this is just a summary of the steps. So stage one, statistical analysis and classification of risk factors, which we have done. Eliciting expert judgment of factors and all that. Okay, so the input, stage two, which will include the formation of membership functions for the group and then the individual factors. And then stage three, we will now go into the calculation of the fuzzy synthetic matrix. Then from there, we will also compute the indexes, the criticality level indexes. And then finally, we get all the outputs, then we present them. Okay, so stage two or 6.2, what do you do? Determine the membership grade. Membership grade, I mentioned to you that they are also termed as the grade alternative, or other papers also call them the alternative grades, or the grade alternatives, any of them acceptable. So let's look at it. And we have seen some of these things in the previous papers. Fuzzy mathematics can be used to generate the membership functions of each critical risk factor and then the principal risk factors. Recall that a grade alternative for assessing the probability and severity of risk factors were defined on a 2-dimension 7-point rating scale. Okay, and they come in a form of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I just want to show you something. I just want to, I don't know whether I'll see it, because about how I just want to get a survey to just show you how it was structured so that you understand it. I just want to get a survey. I'll be happy if I can and chance on a survey to help you understand this. I hope this is the one. Okay, good. This is what I'm talking about. So as you can see from this diagram, you can see that each of the risk factors, this is how, it's just an example. It's not exactly the same as what they did, but it's just an example. This is how the questionnaire was designed. Each of the risk factors has two sides: probability of occurrence and severity of the consequences. And they were graded or rated as 1 to 5. DS, they rated them 1 to 7. And when we rated them, we have meanings for each of the numbers that we put there. So for example, here 1 with respect to probability of occurrence means very low. And then 5 means extremely high. When it comes to severity, 1 means insignificant and 5 means catastrophic. So that's how you should know them. And that's exactly how it has been explained in this contest. So you can see that the 2-dimensional 7-point rating scale, 1 to 7, where 1 means extremely low, and then 7 means extremely high for the degree of probability and then also the severity of risk. Therefore, the membership function of the given critical risk factor is obtained through this equation, okay, which we'll calculate very soon. I'll show you. Where this also represents the factor of particular this. Okay, in other words, like out of the individual membership functions, we also generate the group membership functions. Okay. And before we generate the two of them, which is the group and also the individuals, we need to also know the weightings. The weightings. Okay. So this is just to help us with a kind of membership grading that we'll be doing, 1 to 7. And then from that step, we'll compute the weightings. Okay, the weightings. The weighting function of a variable represent its relative economic and as evaluated by the survey responder. It can be derived from tabulated judgment, analytical hierarchy process, and then a normalized mean method. The latter is adopted to calculate the weightings of the CRFs, PRFs, because it is straightforward and has been used in similar studies. In similar studies, the mean score of a CRF or PR is normalized to drive its weighting function using this. So don't forget this. I quite remember very well that in my first video, I told you that before you can get the weighting functions of each of the critical factors, individual factors, and also the groups, you can decide to use a number of methods: point sharing, point allocation method. You can use tabulated judgment, analytical hierarchy process, analytical hierarchy process, and also normalized mean method. And I mentioned that a normalized mean method has been used more. It doesn't mean that you can't use the other methods. Okay, and the authors have explained why normalized mean method is popular. It's straightforward. It has also been used in similar previous studies. Okay, the mean score, which in this context represents the mean score. The mean score of the two is normalized to derive its weighting using this. In other words, we want to derive a weighting which falls between 0 and 1. 0 and 1. Okay. Then the next thing to do is to establish a multi-criteria and multi-level quasi-synthetic model. So this is where we are going to undertake our analysis and then establish the matrices for each of the factors and also the groups. Okay, I explained this also in my other video, and we'll use the statistics to get the understanding of this better. So this is just an explanation of that, where you combine the membership functions and the weightings. Okay, then what again? So all these things, yeah, well, I mean, he just started to explain and explain and explain. The question that somebody will ask is, so all these explanation, Isaac, if I'm writing my paper, should I explain all these things? In fact, I will say no. Okay, I will say no. But it is also nice if you are able to explain all these things for somebody to say for the audience, for people to understand you. At least if you are not able to even show all these things and write exactly the same thing that these authors wrote, you must be able to explain each step in your fuzzy synthetic evaluation analysis. You must be able to do that. Okay. Okay, so all these things are done, and then they went ahead to even explain the indexes, how to obtain the indexes. So all these things are within the multi-level, multi-criteria fuzzy synthetic evaluation. And they are exactly the same as the ones that we discussed in the previous video. So all these things are just explanation. So once again, you can decide to ignore them or you can decide to work on them. Okay, so now all these things have been done. Another thing too is that the best thing to do, and some reviewers will tell you, is to move section 6. Section 6. Move the whole of section 6 to the methodology section. Yeah. Anyway, they didn't. Let me see. Yeah, the best thing to do is to add it to the methodology, research methodology. Yeah, that's what most reviewers will tell you to do. Most reviewers will not agree that you have to explain all these things at this point. But if you also explain it, that's fine. Depends on how you want to structure your paper. Okay, so we have all these things. Now let's apply it. Application is very important, and that's where we get the understanding of how the 22 critical factors and their 3 groups were used. Okay, so we have this. Now let's establish the membership functions of each of the groups. Okay, so here, to get the membership functions, I mentioned to you that getting the membership functions, you need to go back to the responses from your survey, the survey results, and then pick each of the factors and look at how each of them was rated by the respondent. How many people responded, and then how many people responded to a specific rate on your Likert scale. So an example has been given here. So we are using non-payment of bills. So let's go back and look at non-payment of bills. That's number 13, yeah, which is part of non-payment of bills, which is part of the first group, the first category, as a financial or commercial risk group. We are using it as an example. How was it responded to? Okay, so the non-payment of bills, the survey results show that the respondent rated its probability of occurrence as follows. 0% as extremely low. In other words, no respondent ticked extremely low. Then 5% of the respondents ticked very low. 10% of the respondent or the participant or the people who responded to the survey ticked 10% low. 22.5% as moderate, 25%, and then 27.5% as very high. And then the last one is 10% as extremely low. Okay, so how is this then done? I gave you an example in my previous video, and I think it's good I show it to you again. So look at this, responses from survey. So a survey was conducted, just an example, and 66 people took part in the survey. So out of that survey, example, if you take political extremism, those who rated 1, no one ticked 1 for political extremism. 3 people ticked 2 for political extremism. 8 people ticked 3 for political extremism. 36 people ticked 4 for political extremism. And 19 people ticked 5 for political extremism. So when you add all the respondents together, you get 66. So how do you convert this into membership function? All that you have to do is you take the first one, which come under the first one which was ticked, and you divide it by the 66%. So 0 divided by 66 is 0, as you can see. Then you take the second one, 3 divided by 66, that will give you 0.05. 8 divided by this, 36 divided by 66, 19 divided by 66. So you get it. So this is how the membership functions of each of the groups were generated. So first, get to know the total number of respondents, and also get to know how each of the respondents responded to each of the factors based on the like scale. This is kind of a hard work. This is the part that you have to do some work because it's hard. You need to go back and check your survey responses and take note of each of them. It's kind of a little bit difficult, but if you're able to do that, it's easy for you to generate the membership functions of each of the factors. Okay, so exactly the same thing, but just that they put them in percentage form, but it's not anything. It's the same. It's the same thing as I've explained. So you have to do it for all of them, and then when you do that, you write a membership function for each of them. Then they also use another example. Another example is okay. That's for the occurrence. I mean the probability of occurrence, and then the severity of the same factor, which is the non-payment of bills. Okay. As far as this fuzzy is concerned, we are not doing it for only one section. We are not doing probability of occurrence or risk of probability and leave out the severity of risk. But each section, which is risk of probability and severity of probability, has been captured appropriately. So when it comes to the other side, the same thing was also done. How many people responded? And then what was the percentage based on the total number of responses? So this has been done. Now calculate the weightings of the CSR, the CRFs, and then PRFs. Okay, I'll come back to they didn't talk about, even though they mentioned determining the membership function of the CRFs and PRFs, the authors only talked about only the membership function of the critical risk factors. And then they use even only one example. They didn't go ahead to work on the PRFs. But what I know is that they did it later on, which we will see it. They didn't do it for the groups, the categories. Do it. Now let's come to the weightings. How do we get a weightings? To get a weightings, I told you the other time that one is very easy. All that you have to do is that here we have our risk factors. Okay. The risk factors which were computed based on probability of occurrence and severity of the consequences. So we are doing this for each of them. So you go back to table 2. When you go back to table 2, we have the mean score or the mean values. You can see from here. Risk probability, risk severity. They are here. Okay. So if you pick a factor, in other words, you have to work with table 3 and table 2. So we are dealing with the first group. In the first group, we have 8 factors. So when you go back to table 2, you can go and pick the mean values of probability of risk and then the mean values of severity of risk. Okay, good. Then what do you do? This is also almost the same thing I did with you in a previous video. So you add all the means together, the 8. 5.58 plus 5.13 plus 4.90 plus 4.7 plus 4.73 plus 4.38 plus 4.2 plus 4.15. All the 8 add. When you add all the 8 together, it will give you the total mean. And this total mean will be for the group. The reason why it's for the group is that the 8 of them come together to form the group. They are the sub-variables, the sub-factors in the financial or commercial risk group. So add them together, you get 37.77. Then the weighting, if you remember, I told you that the weighting, they fall between 0 and 1. So what do we do? To get a weighting of each of the factors, all that you have to do is that if you pick 5.58, you divide it by the total for the total mean for the group. 5.58 divided by 37.77. Let's do it and see whether we'll get that. 5.58 divided by 37.7 to give us 0.148. 0.148. Let's see, is that what was good? Yes, exactly. That was exactly what was recorded. Yeah, 0.148. Yeah. Then you do the same thing for the second factor, which is water theft. 5.13 divided by 37.77. 4.9 divided by 37.77. 4.7 divided by 37.77. 4. You do it for each and every one of them. So is that okay? Great. So you do that for group 1. Group 2 too, the same. You take 5.13 plus this, plus this, plus it, plus all the mean on the probability of a risk. The 8 of them, you add them together, and it will give you 35.99. And at 35.99, if you pick each of them, you divide it by the 35.99. Let's do one. So let's take 5.13 divided by 35.99. 5.13 divided by 35.99. Let's see the results. It's 0.142325. So if we decide to put it in 3 decimal places, it's going to be 0.143. 0.143. So that's exactly what we got. And you have to do it for all of them. 5 point this, that. Okay. Then you do the same thing also for the last group. So we are done with the mean probability, or the mean of the probability of the risk. Then you can also come and do it for the mean severity, or the severity of the risk. And these values were also taken from where? From table 2. So when you go to table 2, they are there. You add them, you get 40.38. Divide each of them by the 40.38, it will give you the weight for each of them in each of the groups. Okay, good. So we have the individual, which is the critical risk factors. Now let's come to the group. How do we get a group 1? To get a group 1, this is also the same as what we did in the previous tutorial. So all that you have to do is I have to add the total mean of each of the groups. So we have 3 groups. The total mean of group 1 is 37.77. Total mean of group 2 is 35.99. Total mean of group 3 is 26.06. You add all the 3 together to give you 99.82. 99.82. So if you want to get the weighting of group 1, what you have to do is that you take 37.77 37.77, then you divide it by the total mean of all the groups summed together. It is 99.82. 99.82. And I will give you 0.378. 0.378. 0.378. 0.378. Then you take 35.99 divided by 99.82 to give 0.361. 26.06 divided by 99.82 will give you 0.26. Now let's take the other aspect, which is the risk of severity. Okay. So you also add up the total mean of each group. The three of them will give you 1110.09. So to get a weight of each of them, you take 40.38 divided by total, 39.37 divided by total, 30.34 divided by total. Understood, right? Okay, good. So we have the weighting for the individual factors and also for the group. Okay, good. We are good to go. Now, what is the next thing to do? The next thing to do is to quantify the risk level of each group. The level of risk of each group. So how do we get that? To get that, what we have to do is that we have to multiply okay, so let's just take an example so that to guide us. Recall that the fuzzy synthetic evaluation approach has 3 levels of membership functions from levels 3 to 1. So start from level 3 to 1. Level 3 is derived from the survey based on the experience evaluations of the 40 industry participants. Okay, so that was the one that was done here when I was teaching you this. You have to go back to the survey responses and check how each of the factors were responded to. So that's the third level. Then what again? To assess the risk level of a particular group, the fuzzy relational matrix was derived first based on the results of level 1. So we determine the level 1 and level 2 soon. Okay, using equation 6, which is the combination of table 5 and 6, followed by the principal risk factors fuzzy evaluation matrices. So we are just using an example. So if you take technical, which is in group 3, how was it derived? In other words, how was the membership function? Because already we have determined the membership function of each of the groups. Now, I mean, each of the factors. Now we want to get the groups. How do we get that? Okay, so to get that, all that you have to do is that all the critical values will be expressed in equation 6 in a fuzzy matrix as this. Yeah, so this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6 are from group 3. Group 3. Okay, so this is how each of the factors in group 3, the respondents responded to the risk. That's how they responded to it. And based on that, we generated the matrix. Once again, let me take you here. And also, in addition, let me take you here. This. Good. So we have all these things. Okay, that's good. Then we multiply these membership functions of each of the factors by their weightings. By their weightings. By their weightings. Okay. So how do we get their weightings? Don't forget, we did the weightings here. They are here. So if you are doing this with the probability, the mean probability with group 3, this is how the weightings went. This is how we computed them. If we are dealing with severity, this is how the weighting went. So if you are going to compute this with this, we'll just multiply this by this matrix. And this matrix is the membership function. Membership function by this. And that's exactly what has been done here. The weightings by the membership function. Okay, so let's take an example, and that's exactly what they have done. If you take the probability of occurrence, the weightings are 0.155, 0.173, 0.18, 0.162, 0.171, 0.155. And that's exactly what has been presented here. Okay, then you multiply it by this matrix, which is the membership function generated from how respondents rated each of the factors. Okay, so when you multiply, you add, you multiply, you add, you multiply, and I showed you an example once again in the previous video that to get this is how you have to go about this. You multiply the weight by this, so this times this, membership function by the weight plus membership function plus the weight plus the membership function plus weight, membership function by this, in other words, membership function by the weight, then you add membership function by the weight. In other words, you multiply the membership function by the weight, then you add. Then you add everything to give you this. So you have to add so many things. Okay. So that's the same thing that has been done. So for example, this act was done 0.155 times 0.08 plus 0.173 times 0.00 plus 0.18 times 0.00 plus 0.162 plus 0.03 plus 0.175. You add. Okay. So that's it. Okay. So that's the membership function that you can generate for group 3. We have to do the same thing for group 2 and group 1. And this table presents it better. Okay, so this is for probability of occurrence for group 1, the weightings, and these are their membership functions. So if you want to get a membership function, which is translating to level 2, which will also be helpful for the membership functions of the groupings, then what must be done is that you multiply this plus this plus this, multiply like just as it has been presented here, and you get this. You end up getting one membership function for the group. Okay, so that's for group 1, group 2, group 3. I can do each of them one by one, but be mindful that we have to do with time. So if you want to get more understanding, just go back and watch the first video as how I did this. So you multiply a membership function by a weight or by a weighting function or by a weighting. I'll just multiply weight. Then you add this times this. You add this times this. You add this times this. If you come to the second column, this by the weight plus this by the weight. If you come to the third column, this by this plus this by this. Okay, good. So that's how it has been done for all these things, for the probability of occurrence and also for the severity of occurrence. So these things have been generated, understood. Now, what again should be done? So this is for, what group is this? 0.159. Let me go back to table. Okay, so that's also another example. So an example was presented on group 3. So this was the first one that we did, and this is the second one. Let me show you. So this is for severity, and the first one that we did is for probability of occurrence, and they have been shown in this table. So you can show them again in this table. I've also seen studies where people don't show them in the table. Once they just do the calculation, they end there. Okay, so what is the next thing to do? So using the same procedure, probability and severity fuzzy evaluation matrices of the remaining groups, principal risk factors are determined as presented in the last column. Having determined the fuzzy matrix of each of them, the risk level of a given FRF can be quantified through the formula in equation 13 as follows. So equation 13. Okay. Okay, so this is equation 13. Okay. Where we will first compute this as equation, we use equation 12. Then once we get that, then we multiply the two results from the probability of occurrence and then the probability, the severity of the consequences. Then we multiply the two and we find the square root as we did this from the beginning. Okay, so let's do it. Let's do this. Okay, so to determine this, once again, the third group is also being used, and it's being used as an example here. So the third group is being used as an example here. So remember the third group, the probability of occurrence. This is the fuzzy matrix results that we got. This one. This. Don't forget. This. This. I've made it green. Okay. The individual weighting of the critical factors by the membership functions of the critical factors. Each of them give us this. Okay. Then when you do it for the severity, it also give us this. Don't forget. I'll make this one light blue. Okay, so what do we do? So the next thing to do is that we have to multiply the alternative grade or grade alternative, which is 1 to 7, by these results that we have obtained from the fuzzy matrix computation. Okay, so we'll first take the probability. So for the probability, what we'll do is that because they are being graded, alternative grading 1 to 7, it's going to be 0.02 times 1 plus 0.09 times 2 plus 0.11 times 3 plus 0.32 times 4 plus 0.27 times 5 plus 0.13 times 6 and then 0.06 times 7. Okay, so that's exactly that they have put here. 0.02 times 1 plus 0.0 times. So you do the same for then you add. And when it comes to the severity, you also do the same. 0.01 times 1 plus 0.03 times 2, 0.05 times 3, 0.02 times 4, 0.037 times 5, 0.27 times 6, 0.01 times 7. Then you add everything together. Okay, so this is from the probability section. And this is from the severity section. Okay. So when you add this, it will give you 4.356. And this section will give you 5.011. Then you multiply. So this also somehow take us back to table 1. Table 2. It will take us back to table 2. And table 2, if you remember, we obtain the risk significance index by multiplying the risk probability by the risk severity. Remember. So they say almost the same thing is being done here. But this one is in terms of the FAXI matrix computation results. Then when we got the risk significance index, we computed the square root to get the risk impact or the risk score. So the same thing is being done here. Okay, so let's do it. Yeah, so this times this will give us 21.827. Then you find the square root. Okay, so this is the square root, 21.827, 21.827. In a way, is I would say the significant fuzzy evaluation index. Then the square root of that will give you 4.67. You have to do the same thing for group 1 and for group 2. So that's what they have done. If you do the same thing also for group 1 and group 2, you're also going to get the same thing. That's what they have presented here. Okay, nice. Then, and now let's quantify the overall. Overall here means we are not doing it for each of the groups, but we want to determine it for all. Like we just want to get one score that will represent one fuzzy evaluation score or index that will represent all the groups and then the variables, as we have also done it in the previous video. Okay, so to the obtain fuzzy evaluation metrics, this and that must be okay. So how do we do this? So what we have to do is that we'll pick each of the results that we obtain from the probability of occurrence of the 3 groups. I mean these results, these ones that we've got. So for example, if you take the 3rd group, the probability is this one. In other words, this part is just a continuation of what we did. So you pick the probability, this one, probability for the 3rd group, and then you pick the severity of the 3rd group, as that's also represented here. And then you also pick similar ones that you would do for group 1 and group 2. So you present them in a matrix form. So what do you do next? So the next thing to do is that you multiply these matrices, which we call them the membership functions, by their weightings. And this time around, the question is, what kind of weighting should we use? We have to use the group weightings. So where do we see the group weightings? We'll go back to table 4. In table 4, you can see, you can see the weightings for the groups. So when it's under the risk probability, the group weighting for financial or commercial risk, which is group 1, is 0.378. For group 2, which is legal and social political, group is 0.361. For group 3, it's technical risk, which is 0.261. Then when you come to the risk severity, to the weightings are also here. The group weightings. Okay, so these are the ones that you have to pick. Okay, so you pick them together with the group membership function, and then you multiply. So let's see how it was done. So you can see exactly what I said. So with the probability, with their membership, you multiply them by their membership functions. So the weight by the membership function. Then you do the same thing for the weight for the membership function of what? Of the severity. Once these results have been obtained, now we can go ahead and compute the overall criticality index or the overall criticality level for the data set. So how do we do that? So when you pick this is the probability of occurrence, you multiply each of them by the alternative grades or the grade alternatives. 0.02 times 1 plus 0.07 times 1 times 2, 0.01 times 3, 0.28 times 4, 0.28 times 5, 0.17 times 6, 0.08 times 7. Then you add. You do the same thing also for this, and then you add. Okay, so this, you add. This, you add. Okay, just like how we did it for individual. So this is what I want to say. With respect to section 7.3, the criticality index was computed for the groups, each of the groups. But with respect to section 7.4, it is being done for the entire data set. So that's the difference. Okay, here we wanted to know which of the groups has a higher or the highest critical score, risk critical score. And as you can see from the three groups, group 1 can be rated as the one that has the highest because it ended up scoring 4.91. Group 2 comes second, and group 3 was the last, 4.67. So when you do this and you add and you multiply everything, it will give you a figure of 22.858. So the 22.858, you just find the square root, and the square root will be 4.78, which makes this risk very high because we are dealing with 7-point Likert scale. And for 7-point Likert scale, the middle of the mean value will normally be 3.5. So 3.5 compared to the 4.78, the variance is what? 4.78 minus 3.5. The variance is 1.28. So 1.28 divided by 3.5. Yeah, which is quite significant. 36.57. Yeah, significant. Yeah. So it's something that must be dealt with. So it's an issue. It's not a low risk. It's an issue which must, even though it's not that extremely high, but it's not a low risk which must be pushed under the carpet. This must be addressed, and it must be addressed as soon as possible. Okay, so that is all that you have to know. The rest you have to just discuss the results, explain, interpret. And then here the authors also presented a table and just the results, just for you to understand the overall results and for interpretation's sake. And this has also been done in the other papers that are used for the tutorials in the previous videos. So for example, when it comes to probability of occurrence, you can see that the indexes, okay, is 4.72. And then the overall, just a minute. Yeah. They mean this for 4.762, 4.523, and then 4.356. Probability of occurrence. Yeah, I mean this figure, this is for the first figure, which is the green. That's what they mean. And then when it comes to group 1 is 4.762, group 2 is 4.523, and group 3 is 4.356. They are all for probability of occurrence. When it comes to severity, it's 5.060, 4.935, and 5.011. And that's exactly what they have presented in this table. Okay. Then the overall, where did they get overall from? The overall is seen here, the overall figure, which is the probability of occurrence is 4.57, and then for severity 5.002. Okay, good. So what is the overall risk level? So the overall risk level, when they were multiplied, we got, for example, the group 3, we got 4.672. Yeah, this one. This. I mean, when we multiply and then we did a square root, we got this. And then for group 2, it's 4.72. Group 1 is 4.901 or 4.09 something. Yeah. And then the overall is this 4.781 to 3 decimal places. Okay. So they were just trying to show or explain whether it's high, moderate, whatever. Yeah. And then they ended up ranking it. So it seems that group 1 is the one leading with the highest risk score, followed by legal and social. This is just a summary. Okay, this table is just show you the summary. You can decide not to bring this table here, but if you bring it, that will also be fantastic, just to assist in the interpretation of the results. And for anybody who wants to read your paper, the person can have a quick look at the outcome of the fuzzy synthetic analysis that you conducted. So this is good. Yeah. So the rest you explain. Just explain. Then the authors went ahead to even give the strengths and weaknesses of the fuzzy synthetic evaluation method. Yeah, which I think should be part of, if I am a reviewer, I will tell the authors to move this to the conclusion session and add it to the limitations of the paper, the strengths. And yeah, well, that's also good. And it was presented. That's good. It's great. Okay, so I think that's all for today. And I'm happy that so far we have been able to capture fuzzy synthetic evaluation. The fuzzy synthetic evaluation, I must say that it's not difficult, but it requires some serious attention to be paid to it. If you don't pay attention to this, you miss one step and you get yourself confused. So just take your time, step by step, and do it. And once you do 2 or 3 or 4, you can do 2 or 3 or 4 of them. You'll be good to go. So you write good papers using a fuzzy synthetic evaluation. So I wish you all the best and God bless you and see you in another tutorial. Take care. Bye.